So let's read the parable of the steward. Now he was also saying to the disciples, there was a rich man who had a manager, and this manager was reported to him as squandering his possessions. And he called him and said to him, what is this I hear about you? Give an accounting of your management, for you can no longer be a manager. The manager said to himself, what do I do? Since my master is taking the management away from me, I am not strong enough to dig, I am ashamed to beg. I know what I shall do, so that when I am removed from the management, people will welcome me into their homes. And he summoned each one of his master's debtors. And he began saying to the first, how much do you owe my master? And he said, 100 measures of oil. And he said to him, take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, and how much do you owe? And he said, 100 measures of wheat. And he said to him, take your bill and write 80. And his master praised the unrighteous manager because he had acted shrewdly. For the sons of this age are more shrewd in relation to their own kind than the sons of light. And I say to you, make friends for yourselves by means of the wealth of unrighteousness, so that when it fails, they will receive you into the eternal dwellings. He who is faithful in a very little thing is faithful also in much, and he who is unrighteous in a very little thing is unrighteous also in much. Therefore, if you have not been faithful in the use of unrighteous wealth, who will entrust the true riches to you? And if you have not been faithful in the use of that which is another's, who will give you that which is your own? No servant can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and wealth. Now the Pharisees, who were lovers of money, were listening to all these things and were scoffing at him. So you notice in that parable, a few things stand out. Number one, money, wealth. But we're really talking about in parable, since we're in the parabolic, we're talking about monetary or carnal wealth, physical wealth. But Jesus is also shifting at the end in his explanation to hint at something else. True riches. This is what the parable is about, and this is what we have to nail down. Well, first we need to do a quick overview of our conventional interpreters and see whether their interpretations reflect this value that is suggested in the parable of the steward. Yes, the parable is about money. It's about wealth. But the parable in Jesus' explanation of it later is not about that at all. It clearly indicates that this is about true riches, not unrighteous mammon. That unrighteous mammon is just a figure of something else, something that we're responsible for in a certain time, but later on we're not going to be responsible for that kind of wealth at all. So we have to see, do these interpreters value that ultimate kind of wealth, or do they even identify it at all? But first, let me give you these verses just to keep in mind what we're talking about. Matthew 16:19 through 21, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. And there's this one. He then speaks of what is behind the desire of heavenly currency. The eye is the lamp of the body. So then, if your eye is clear, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light that is in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? Matthew 6:22 through 23. Now, this is what is behind the currency. This is the ultimate thing that is behind the figure of this physical currency, light. Truth, Messiah's truth is what is behind it and is the foundation for all of it. The currency of the earth, earthly wealth, mammon, gold, possessions, is defined by its perishability, moth, rust, thieves. It is unrighteous because it is temporary and uncertain. Luke 16:11, unrighteous mammon. And then there is the currency of heaven. Heavenly treasure is defined by its permanence, neither moth nor rust. Jesus explicitly tells us that our activity here, giving to the poor, forgiving, praying in secret, is how we store up this currency in heaven. Store up. This supports the idea that the currency is, number one, truth, because that's what we do all of this for. Relationship and action, not physical coin. If this is true, the ultimate currency is what spiritually motivates. Now, we recall that Jesus' admonition to the two synthesis of the law, love of God and love of neighbor, comes in that order. Love of God is love of truth. You can't love God unless you love the truth, unless you have a desire to know transcendent truth. Then after that, that motivates you giving to others. But what do our interpreters say about all this? About the parable in particular? How about this one from Thomas Schreiner? The parable of the dishonest steward is one of the most difficult to interpret in Luke. Where does the parable end? Does it end with the verse 7, 8, or 9? Is the master in verse 8 Jesus, or the master of the steward in the parable? What does the master praise the dishonest manager? Verse 8. And what is the message of the parable for the church? These we will endeavor to answer. But let's look at this interpretation of the gist of the parable from Tony Evans. Jesus reminded his disciples that they were stewards of their earthly resources, not owners. So they should use their possessions with eternity in mind. Christians ought to use their earthly resources now, wisely and generously for kingdom purposes. In this way, lives will be changed and people saved by the gospel. Okay. Here's one from R. Gins. I don't know who that is, but we find this in the Gospel of Jesus Christ according to St. Luke, a Catholic commentary on Holy Scripture. What is to be done with the goods of which a disciple of Christ strips himself? Jesus reminds them that the poor are always with us. Therefore, let him use his goods to make friends with these special friends of God, and so secure a welcome for himself in the world to come. Okay. How about Douglas Mangum? Here's his quote. The right use of wealth is the overarching theme in chapter 16. Jesus speaks about a steward who makes friends through wealth. He also speaks against those who love money, concluding with a parable about a man whose greediness and unbelief leads to eternal torment. And this one by Howard Marshall in his commentary in the New Bible Commentary. After showing his concern for the poor and the outcasts, Jesus gives some warnings against avarice and wealth, verses 14 and 19, which are directed to people who were in danger of failing to respond to the gospel before it was too late. They should, in any case, have listened to the teaching of the Old Testament scriptures about the moral law of God, he says, which remains permanently valid. Okay, look, let me give you a short synopsis of where we're going. We first note that there is no indication that Jesus means that he commends such shady behavior, or that the steward is welcomed into heaven for his shadiness. It means the kind of thinking that he displays, of doing everything he can to avoid loss of his heavenly position as part of God's economy, when he is welcomed into heavenly regions by those with whom he dealt in life. He sees the end coming, so he moves to fix his relationships by lowering debt, a figure of removing the burdens of the law, not as a manager of money, but as a scholar and religious leader, Pharisee, scribe, Sadducee, managing God's currency of truth, particularly prophetic truth of Christ. He is not a good steward, but he can be welcomed into heavenly regions if he does the minimum with God's currency by, if not being able to give them the essentials of the prophetic truth of Jesus, at least admitting that the law is superseded by the light yoke of the law of Jesus and faith in Christ in his prophetic word. So when that is, if that is understood, let us go forth and go quickly as we can through my interpretation of this. The basic move, the prophetic transition of stewardship. Now, let me go quickly through this and see if we can capture it. Jesus is not commending dishonesty. He is exposing a prophetic transition of stewardship from the old leadership class who mishandled the oracular word to the Messiah who fulfills it and entrusts it to faithful hearers. The unjust steward is prophetic shorthand for Israel's faith leaders, the scribes, priests, and ruling teachers, those entrusted with the Father's estate, the truth of the prophetic word. It's not carnal currency. Those who squandered it, mismanaged it, buried it under human systems, fences, halakha, conceptual theology, symbolic religion, and power structures. He is the steward being removed. This is not moral advice. It is a prophetic indictment and a prophetic unveiling of what happens at the turning of the ages. As in all of Jesus' parables, it is a prophetic parable. 2, give an account of your stewardship. You can no longer be a steward. What does this mean? This is a Revelation 12, Daniel 7 type moment in parabolic dress. God calls Israel's religious establishment to account just before the transfer event, which is Christ's fulfillment of Messianic prophecy. The audit is Christ's arrival. The firing is the cross, resurrection, ascension. Their management is exposed as corrupt. They didn't deliver the debtors, the people, into true covenant light. They inflated the debt of the law, added burden, obscured the prophetic promise, and controlled the estate for their own gain. Now, the steward's panic, verses 3 through 7. He realizes he is losing power. He reduces the debts to secure allies in the coming crisis. He's integrating the currency of truth. Integrating the currency of truth insight. The reduction of debt is not merely a financial manipulation, it's an eschatological acknowledgement of the law's approaching obsolescence. The debt the steward lowers, oil, wheat, is a figure of the heavy burden of the law's requirements and the oppressive legalistic interpretations imposed by religious leaders. The steward, acting as a disgraced manager of God's currency of truth, performs the base minimum. He admits that the full crushing debt of the old system is superseded. By lowering the debt, he is removing the burdens of the law, figuratively acknowledging that the law is being replaced by the light yoke of Jesus and faith in the prophetic word. He cannot give them the essential Christ, but he can free them from the unsustainable debt his system has created. This is symbolic of the leader's last-minute manipulation as the prophetic hour approached. Instead of submitting to Jesus and the fulfilled word, they scrambled to protect their system by adjusting religious obligations and courting crowds to survive the prophetic catastrophe. And we see some of this in the New Testament. For example, John the Baptist warning the people that were coming to baptism, who warned you of the judgment to come? And he insulted them because he knew them. At the last minute, at this last minute in Israel, everyone had this Messianic expectation. And the corrupt, of course, wanted to prepare for it in their own way, see, not spiritually. They wanted to maneuver themselves in a way so that when the kingdom came in, they would be a high tier, a high position in the kingdom. The master commended the shrewdness. This is not moral approval. This is a prophetic clarification and an epistemological shame statement. Even corrupt leaders can read the signs of the times. Even corrupt stewards know when judgment is coming. Even corrupt men know how to maneuver in a crisis. But the sons of light should be even better at reading the prophetic moment. They know their own hour better than you know the hour of your visitation. Remember Luke 19:44. Israel failed not because Jesus was unclear, but because they refused the prophetic knowledge that would have prepared them. This is an indictment for lack of prophetic discernment. Make friends by unrighteous mammon. Unrighteous mammon equals the entire corrupt system of religious capital, symbolic power, and inherited prestige that the old leaders controlled. Jesus is saying, use the passing world, its systems, its structures, its money, its illusions for the sake of people's souls, not for your own religious empire, because the system itself is about to collapse. This is eschatological pragmatism. Use temporary structures like the relief from the oppressive law to facilitate access to the true revelatory word before those structures crumble forever. And so here's the big punchline, verses 10 through 13. Servants of two masters. You cannot steward God's prophetic word and simultaneously steward human religious systems, conceptual theology, man-made authority structures, or the approval economy of religion. Why? Because the prophetic word, once fulfilled in Christ, is the sole master and sole epistemic authority. Every leader is either stewarding the prophetic Christ or stewarding their own kingdom. Now here's the summary in just a few sentences. The parable prophesies the transition of covenant stewardship from the corrupt managers of Israel's religious and legalistic capital to the Messiah who fulfills the prophetic word, and then to his disciples who submit to that fulfilled revelation as their sole epistemic authority, ensuring the release from the law's burden for those who were previously indebted. So, rich, poor, money, moral law, door, sheep, fig tree. Christ uses a million of these mundane objects in his parables. Why does he do this? Well, he's given the world a choice between two things. And he's given them this choice and say, pick one. Does it have to do with the truth and me? Or does it have to do with the things that these things obviously are, which are just carnal and mundane objects of the world? So it's a choice really between the world and spiritual things. But, you know, the church hates this, especially conservative churches, because anytime you say the world's spiritual, it's like when you say symbolic, it means something unreal, something is not corporeal, something that is kind of like the ether, like a smoke or a mist. It doesn't really exist. The opposite is true. Now, when you say spiritual, what you're actually doing is, if you get that right, is you're deepening your moral responsibility, because the moral responsibility goes through to ultimate things, not to the degraded things of the world and the degraded things of the mind. It goes to heavenly objects and heavenly values. It goes to Christ and not us. It goes to the truth and not our feelings. It doesn't go to tradition. It doesn't go to concepts, but it goes to a transcendence. It goes to transcendent knowledge and information. And these are the things that are most spiritual and most valuable in the universe to God. Why is this? Because we are not carnal beings, essentially. We're spiritual beings. And when we die, all this stuff is going down into the dirt. But there's a good chance, if we grasp this truth rightly, understand it and love it, and give it to its author, then we can escape the destruction that comes with us going back to the earth, and that being the end of it. We hate saying spiritual because what we think is, well, this is antinomianism, this is easy believism, this is telling people that they can believe, but they don't have to be under Christ's lordship. They don't have to do anything. They don't have to be moral. It's the opposite of what we're saying. The reason that they say this is because they don't understand what the ultimate value is, and the ultimate thing that God created to penetrate the human heart and human consciousness, to set it on fire for God and keep it centered on God without wavering. They don't know what it is, and so they have to kind of keep it under control by keeping the language under control, you see. So what this actually does is, when you find the truth and you find out what real spirituality is, which is the Messianic truth, the oracular truth, the scriptural truth of Messiah and Messiah himself, then it starts you on a journey to real moral reformation, because moral reformation, if it's real, cannot move forward in a real manner unless it's based on something real. When you say truth, what you're saying is you're saying something spiritual. Where is the truth? Is it over there? Is it over here? Is it sitting on my counter? Is it in Los Angeles, California? No, it is nowhere. It doesn't exist in the physical universe. It is a very spiritual thing. It is not this phone, except it has a quality of this phone in that it is subjective. The difference is, one is ultimate, one is not here. That's the difference between what is spiritual and what is not spiritual. One is of ultimate value to its maker, and the other is something that is designed at best as a symbol and an indicator of what that thing is. That is what the things of the world are supposed to be. Just symbols and indicators of these things. It's not the thing itself that it points to. It is a cursory representation. And that's why when we talk about morality and we keep saying this is about morality and this is about money, no, it's not. It's not about that. It's about something much, much deeper. And what Jesus is doing is he's giving you a choice. On the one hand, carnal money. On the other hand, spiritual money. Take your pick. because one is me and my word, and the other is the world that is set for destruction.